Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. The witching hours at the Comet Cafe typically unfolded in hushed tones. The low rumble of a long-haul rig idling outside, the clink of a spoon against ceramic as some sleepless soul sought refuge in caffeine. But the quietude fractured the very air, thickening the instant the five men breached the doorway. A palpable pressure descended like the weight before a thunderclap, and I stood squarely in its path. 6 months I'd been pouring coffee and flipping patties beneath the comet's neon glow, ever since the ivy-covered walls of academia had spat me out. It wasn't the life I'd pictured, but the rent got paid, and the pre-dawn solitude offered space, a canvas on which to sketch out a future. Mostly, I found a strange peace in the nocturnal rhythm, the hiss of the grill, the gurgle of the ancient percolator. That particular night began indistinguishably from any other. 2 a.m. bled towards 3. I polished the already gleaming Formica counter, the jukebox crooning a melancholic ballad in the corner, a soundtrack to the near-empty room. Only a quiet couple, silver-haired and sharing a wedge of apple pie near the window, broke the stillness. Then the bell above the door chimed, a sharp, discordant note. My gaze lifted. 5 figures filled the entrance, their attire too sharp, too pressed for this humble roadside haven. Laughter, loud and edged with something brittle, bounced off the linoleum. An unnerving energy pulsed from them, a coiled tension visible in their movements, in the glint of their eyes that immediately snagged my nerves. "Evening," I offered, stretching my lips into the practiced curve of a waitress's smile. "Table or counter?" The apparent frontman, tall with striking salt and pepper hair, flashed a grin that didn't touch his eyes. Predatory. "Coffee," he commanded, his voice smooth but carrying an undertone of gravel. "Black and abundant, sweetheart." A flicker of irritation at the diminutive, but I smoothed my expression. Antagonizing patrons, especially this configuration, served no purpose. I filled 5 heavy mugs, the dark liquid steaming, and retreated to the relative safety behind the counter, my senses on high alert. They commandeered the largest booth, their conversation a low, rumbling growl I couldn't decipher, punctuated by bursts of laughter that felt less like mirth and more like a display. Sporadically, one would scan the room, assessing, cataloging. The silver-haired couple finished their pie, signaled for the check. As the woman rose, adjusting her coat, one of the men emitted a low, appreciative whistle. "Say now," he drawled loud enough to carry. "Ditch the old-timer, come join the real party." Her husband stiffened, his face flushing crimson. "See here, you—" The leader cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Easy, Pops. Just admiring the view. No harm." The air crackled. "Folks," I interjected quickly, holding up their bill. "Ready when you are, right here. Drive safe." They scurried to the register, paid with fumbling hands, and vanished into the night, the bell's jingle sounding unnervingly loud in their wake. Suddenly the diner felt cavernous yet suffocatingly small. just me and them. For a time, silence resettled, broken only by the clatter of their mugs and their continued boisterous talk. But as the clock hands crept towards the deepest part of the night, the atmosphere curdled, their volume increased, their jokes growing coarser, laced with innuendo, some clearly aimed my way. I feigned deafness, focusing on wiping down the coffee machine, but a tremor had taken root in my hands as I performed the ritual of refilling their cups. Around 3:30, the bells sang out again. A young woman entered, maybe early 20s, weariness etched onto her face, the slump of her shoulders suggesting the end of a long shift elsewhere. 5 heads swiveled in unison, a pack catching scent. "Well now," the leader purred, his voice resonating in the strained quiet. "Looks like things are picking up." The newcomer cast a nervous glance towards the booth, then met my eyes. I tried to telegraph a warning, a silent, "Be careful," but she simply slid onto a stool at the counter, asking softly for a menu. Before I could hand it over, one of the others, broad-shouldered, arms sleeved in ink, detached himself from the group and ambled towards her. "Evening, lovely." Bruin, as I'd mentally dubbed him, leaned in. "Lonely over here, come sit with us, drinks are on the house." She shook her head, pulling her jacket tighter. "No, thank you, I'm quite all right here." Bruin wasn't deterred. His hand landed on her shoulder, heavy, proprietary. "Oh, don't be shy. We're gentlemen, honest." I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes, the way her muscles bunched beneath his touch. Thought abandoned me. Instinct took over. "Sir," my voice emerged, steadier than I felt. "Please let her be." She declined. The diner plunged into absolute silence. 5 sets of eyes pivoted, locking onto me. A cold dread seeped into my stomach. What have I done? Bruin slowly retracted his hand and rejoined his companions, but Silas, the leader, rose. He moved towards the counter with deliberate, unhurried steps, like a panther closing distance. "What was that you said?" My throat constricted. I forced a swallow. I asked you to leave her alone. She doesn't wish to be disturbed." He leaned forward, his face inches from mine across the formica barrier. The stale scent of coffee clung to him. "And who exactly plans on making us? You." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat I was sure he could perceive. Yet I held his gaze. "There are cameras," I lied, nodding towards the empty ceiling corners. "And the sheriff's department has already been alerted. Standard procedure for groups like yours." He stared, unblinking, for a long, agonizing moment. I braced myself, certain he would vault the counter. Then he laughed, a dry, rasping sound devoid of humor. "Got nerve, kid. Credit where it's due." He turned back to his crew. "Let's roll, fellas. Atmosphere here's gone sour." They shuffled out, scraping chairs, grumbling. But at the door, Silas paused, looking back directly at me. "We'll be seeing you again, sweetheart." The bell jingled its final, ominous note as they departed. Air rushed back into my lungs in a ragged gasp. My knees threatened to buckle. I gripped the counter edge for support. The young woman, Maya, stared at me, her eyes wide pools of shock and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't know what." I managed a shaky nod, words failing me. She finished her coffee quickly and left, leaving me utterly alone in the humming silence. Every creak of the old building, every passing headlight sent jolts of adrenaline through me for the remainder of my shift. When dawn painted the horizon and my replacement ambled in, whistling, tears of pure relief pricked my eyes. I convinced myself it was over, a harrowing anecdote for hushed retelling. But a week later, walking towards my beat-up sedan after another late shift, a familiar silhouette detached itself from the shadows beside my car. Silas, that same predatory smile catching the weak glow of the parking lot lamps. "Told you we'd cross paths again, sweetheart," he murmured. Ice traced its way down my spine, my keys dug into my palm, a makeshift, pathetic weapon. "What do you want?" He pushed away from the car, closing the distance between us. "Just tying up loose ends. My associates and I, we take exception to being disrespected." My gaze darted around the deserted lot. The diner stood dark and silent, utterly alone. "Look," I pleaded, fighting to keep the tremor from my voice. "No trouble, I was just doing my job." His laugh echoed, colder this time, bouncing off the asphalt. "Trouble? Oh, sweetheart, trouble hasn't even begun." Movement flickered at the edge of my vision. With sickening certainty, I realized we weren't alone. The other four materialized from the darkness, fanning out, forming a loose, inescapable circle. In that heart-stopping instant, a stark choice presented itself. Collapse, plead hope for improbable mercy, or fight. I chose fight. Summoning every ounce of strength fueled by terror, I swung my heavy shoulder bag in a wide arc towards Silas's head. It connected with a solid, satisfying thump. He staggered back, momentarily stunned. Seizing their collective surprise, I bolted. Sheer panic lent wings to my feet. Shouts erupted behind me, the heavy pounding of their footsteps chasing me. But fear was a potent propellant. Lungs screaming, heart threatening to detonate, I fled the parking lot, sprinted down the empty street. I didn't dare stop until the fluorescent lights of a 24-hour convenience store offered sanctuary. I burst through the automatic doors, gulping air, shouting hoarsely for the startled clerk to call the police. The ensuing hours dissolved into a montage of flashing blue lights, clipped questions, shaky statements. My car, they reported, sat violated, all 4 tires slashed. Of the men, however, there was no trace. The following morning, I called the Comet Cafe and quit. No wage was worth that kind of peril. For weeks, shadows held menace. Every unexpected noise made me jump. Pepper spray became a permanent fixture in my bag. New locks fortified my apartment door. Gradually, the sharp edges of fear dulled, though the scar remained. Life cautiously resumed its rhythm, but the memory of that night stayed, vivid and instructive. It had peeled back a layer of myself, revealing a core I hadn't known existed. The capacity to act, to defend when cornered. A brutal lesson, potentially costly, yet it unearthed a resilience, a vein of courage previously untapped. Now, years removed, thoughts of those men occasionally surface. I wonder where their path of casual cruelty has led them. Who else has felt the chill of their presence in the lonely hours? But more often I think of Maya at the counter, and how one small, terrified act of defiance might have altered her night, perhaps her life. I no longer walk the graveyard shift, but I carry the weight of that experience. It serves as a stark reminder that even in the deepest darkness, choice remains. We can surrender to fear, become its captive, or we can excavate the bravery to stand for ourselves, and sometimes for others. It is rarely simple, almost never safe, but ultimately it is these choices that sculpt who we become. And I choose to be the one who stands, regardless of how menacing the night appears. The cold kiss of metal against my neck. That's how the nightmare confirmed its arrival. A simple fare request, a mundane tap on a screen, had somehow rerouted my life onto a path paved with terror. Who imagines their ordinary gig driving strangers culminates in this? My name is Leo. For the better part of a year, navigating the city grid for a rideshare app had been my rhythm, a necessary counterpoint to tuition fees and textbook costs while I chipped away at my degree. The nights were usually a predictable tapestry, weaving through streets carrying boisterous students, weary professionals commuting late, wide-eyed tourists soaking in the urban glow. Nothing, however, hinted at the abyss waiting on that particular rain-slicked Friday. Midnight had just bled across the clock face. Exhaustion tugged at me, whispering temptations of ending the shift. But then the notification chimed, a fare amplified by surge pricing, too lucrative to ignore. I steered towards the pickup coordinates, finding myself on an unfamiliar, poorly lit street corner where shadows clung thick and heavy. Beneath the stuttering pulse of a lone street lamp stood my passenger, tall, wiry, a dark hoodie casting his face into obscurity. An internal alarm, faint but insistent, began to sound. I silenced it. Judging passengers was a luxury this job didn't afford. He slipped into the back seat like a phantom, trailing the damp scent of the downpour and stale cigarette smoke. "Appreciate the stop," he rasped, his voice a low growl of gravel. "Not many willing to fetch from this neck of the woods." A semblance of a smile stretched my lips as I met his gaze in the rearview mirror. Dark, piercing eyes stared back, igniting a tremor deep within my spine. "No worries," I managed, aiming for nonchalance. "Where are we headed?" He recited an address an hour distant, deep into the hinterlands I rarely ventured. The promised fare, though, was significant. I inputted the destination into the navigation, the digital voice a stark contrast to the tension thickening the air, and pulled the car into the rain-swept street. Silence descended, punctuated only by the hypnotic sweep of the wipers and the drumming tattoo of rain against the roof. Minutes stretched, taut and unnerving. I felt his stare, a palpable weight on the back of my head, tracking every subtle shift I made. "So," I ventured, the quiet becoming unbearable, "heading way out there on a night like this? Big plans?" The ensuing silence stretched so long, I wondered if he'd even registered the question. When he finally spoke, his words were shards of ice injected directly into my veins. "Running," he stated flatly, "from something ugly." My fingers clenched the steering wheel, knuckles bleaching white. "Oh?" The sound escaped my throat, thin and reedy. Like... He leaned forward, his presence looming, breath ghosting near my ear. The law, he whispered, the word itself a threat. Did something unforgivable. They're hunting. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat I was certain he could perceive. Calm, I told myself. Stay calm. What exactly did you do? He settled back against the seat, an unsettling amusement coloring his tone. Why don't you ease over to the shoulder? I can give you the full picture. Every nerve ending screamed, drive, escape, vanish. But the highway unfurled before us, a desolate ribbon flanked by dense, dripping trees. No refuge, no exit. I don't know if that's wise, I stammered. Maybe best if I just get you where you're going. His hand shot out, clamping onto my shoulder with startling force. Pull over, now. Compliance felt like the only option. I guided the car onto the sodden, muddy verge. The moment the wheels stopped turning, I felt it, cold, hard, unmistakable, pressing into the nape of my neck. A gun. No need to verify visually. All right, he said, his voice chillingly devoid of emotion. Here's the play. You're getting out, slow and easy. Then you're getting in the back. I'm taking the wheel. My mind scrambled, desperately seeking an escape route, a loophole, anything. But the unwavering pressure of the barrel against my skin anchored me to reality. Limited options. Zero, perhaps. Unbuckling felt like severing a lifeline. I pushed the door open, stepping out into the relentless drizzle. As I circled towards the rear door, the brief flare of the interior dome light illuminated his face. His eyes were frantic, pupils dilated pools of darkness. Whatever demons chased him, whatever transgression stained his past, I was now ensnared in its terrifying orbit. He slid behind the wheel, the weapon never wavering from my direction. Phone, he commanded, a sharp bark. I relinquished it, watching helplessly as he powered down the window and flung my connection to the outside world into the consuming blackness. As we merged back onto the highway, a desperate plea formed on my lips. Look, I began, my voice trembling despite my resolve. This doesn't have to go further. I won't say a word, I swear. Just let me walk away. A laugh, sharp and devoid of humor, escaped him. Too late, friend. You're part of the narrative now. No choice in the matter. The next hour unfolded in a suffocating silence, thick with unspoken menace. Familiar cityscapes dissolved into rolling terrain, then dense, forbidding forests. We were ascending into the mountains, leaving civilization further and further behind. Eventually, he wrenched the wheel, turning onto a barely discernible dirt track, swallowed by the gloom. The car bucked and lurched, climbing relentlessly, deeper into the embrace of the wilderness. We jolted to a halt before a small, ramshackle cabin. Out, he ordered, the gun emphasizing the command. The cabin's interior was stark, a scarred table, two mismatched chairs, a rudimentary kitchenette clinging to one wall. He gestured towards a chair, and I sank into it as he began to pace, a low, incoherent muttering escaping his lips. "What's the plan?" I asked, hating the tremor that frayed the edges of my voice. "What happens to me?" He stopped his restless movement, pinning me with that unnerving stare. "Undecided," he replied. depends entirely on your level of cooperation. Hours bled together. He oscillated between fits of manic energy, rambling about unseen conspiracies, about shadowy figures pursuing him, and periods of unsettling stillness. I attempted conversation, tried to forge some fragile human connection, but his moods shifted like quicksand. One moment, a flicker of something almost rational. The next, the gun barrel would find my temple again as he accused me of collaborating with his imagined persecutors. Then, as the first tentative fingers of dawn painted the rough-hewn walls in shades of gray, a sound pierced the oppressive quiet. Sirens, distant but undeniably growing closer. My captor, Silas, heard them too, his face twisted into a mask of fury. "You!" he spat, venom dripping from the word. "You somehow brought them here." I shook my head violently. "No, impossible! You threw my phone away, remember?" He wasn't hearing it. He lunged, hauling me brutally to my feet. "We're moving now." He shoved me towards the cabin door, the gun digging painfully into the small of my back. But as we stumbled into the pale morning light, salvation appeared, a procession of police vehicles ascending the dirt track, emergency lights painting the trees in strobes of red and blue. The world dissolved into chaos. Silas roared incoherently, yanking me in front of him, a desperate human shield. Shouted commands echoed from the tree line. "Drop the weapon! Let him go!" Then a sharp, deafening report split the air, and the ground rushed up to meet me. I landed hard, the impact expelling the air from my lungs. For a disoriented moment, I thought the bullet had found me. Gasping, struggling for breath, I realized I was intact. A few feet away, Silas lay still, a dark stain blossoming rapidly on the damp earth beneath him. The subsequent hours were a disorienting blur of paramedics checking vitals, uniformed officers asking questions I could barely process, the scratchy comfort of a shock blanket. I learned his name then, Silas Thorne, wanted across 3 states for a litany of violent offenses. My abduction, reported when I failed to check in, had inadvertently triggered the extensive manhunt that cornered him in this remote hideout. Sitting in the sterile quiet of an ambulance, watching the sun crest the mountain peaks, the sheer weight of the ordeal began to settle. I had looked into the void, felt its chilling breath, and somehow, inexplicably, returned. But the return journey was far from over. Weeks dissolved into months as I navigated the treacherous terrain of recovery. Every car idling beside me at an intersection sent adrenaline surging through my veins. The innocent ping of a phone notification became a trigger for panic. Driving for the rideshare service again felt unthinkable, an impossibility, yet slowly, painstakingly fortified by therapy and the unwavering support of loved ones, I began to mend. Survival, I came to understand, was its own quiet triumph. True strength wasn't the absence of fear, but the courage to proceed despite it. Nightmares still visited, sudden noises still made me flinch, but I was reclaiming ownership of my life, fragment by fragment. I found a new purpose, volunteering at a crisis hotline, transforming my trauma into empathy for others navigating their own darkness. And then, on the anniversary of that harrowing night, I did the inconceivable. I drove back up into those very mountains, not to court the ghosts of terror, but to measure the distance I had traveled within myself. standing there, overlooking the vast, silent wilderness that had briefly been my prison. An unexpected calm settled over me. The road ahead remained uncertain, potentially fraught with its own challenges, but I carried a newfound certainty within me. The resilience to face whatever lay beyond the horizon. For sometimes the most profound journeys aren't measured in miles covered, but in the arduous, essential return to oneself. Stronger, scarred, but undeniably whole. Not the blackness, thick as silt, nor the miasma of age-old water clinging to the air. No, the first trespass on my senses was the sound. A resonance low and unnervingly steady, a machine heartbeat where no machine should be. 15 years I'd walked these guts of the city, the Department of Municipal Works my church, these tunnels my scripture. I knew their dead silences, their dripping confessions. No active machinery down here, not since the Carter administration. My lamp's beam fractured the Stygian gloom. My watch face glowed 2:47 p.m. Above, 50 feet of earth and asphalt swallowed the afternoon sun. My boots disturbed the shallow effluent, each splash a small profanity in the quiet. Ancient brickwork, slick with perpetual damp, wept mineral tears that hung like soiled chandeliers from the vaulted ceiling. Deeper I went, drawn by that subterranean thrum, louder now, yet not menacing, persistent rather, like the hum of some vast hidden refrigerator, but smoother, purer. My grip instinctively firmed on the lamp. Its light snagged movement in the watery film, just vermin, a rat traversing the narrow service ledge. Legion they were down here. This one, though, it possessed a certain heft, an unsettling stillness in its gaze before it vanished. My phone, a dead screen mocking the void. Protocol demanded half-hourly check-ins, but the sturdy Kenwood on my hip had offered only whispers of static for the past hour. I thumbed the transmit button. Dispatch Silas here. Sector Gamma 9, Old North Quarter Network. Acknowledge. White noise answered indifferent. Again. Dispatch, read me? Over. Only the hiss of emptiness. The resonance shifted, dipping infinitesimally in pitch. A shiver traced my spine, unrelated to the tunnel's chill. The sound wasn't ahead anymore. It suffused the space, bouncing off the curved walls, seeming to emanate from the very bricks themselves. I swept the lamp's beam, a frantic search for wires, conduits, anything mechanical. Nothing but century-old masonry and morbid blooms of moss. I wrestled my work slate from its pouch, calling up the schematics. This artery of the drainage system, laid down 1887, upgrades in 23 and 62, then only patchwork repairs, no power lines charted, no pumping stations, naught that could birth such a sound. The slate's display wavered, pixels dissolving into momentary chaos before reforming. The battery icon plunged, 82% to 67% in a heartbeat. I killed the power, stowing it away with a sudden urgency. Louder now, the thrum. The grit under my boots grated as I turned. Resolve hardening. Back to the surface, call in the specialists. And then I saw it. 20 feet distant, bleeding from a side passage. A faint luminescence, azure and pulsing. A rhythm that matched the sound, a heartbeat rendered in cold light. Every junction, every feeder pipe in this labyrinth was etched into my memory. That tunnel had no right to exist. The water deepened as I neared the aperture, rising over my ankles. My lamp revealed walls not of familiar brick, but of roughly hewn stone, ancient and unrecorded. The blue glow seemed shy, retreating as I advanced, forever hovering at the edge of my sight. The humming intensified, vibrating through the soles of my boots, rattling my teeth. My watch stuttered, its digital face a scramble of dying segments before it went dark. The lamp beam weakened, its clean white light yellowing, sickening. My backup torch, inert. The phone, a brick. I stood at the mouth of the impossible passage, the rhythmic blue painting shifting hieroglyphs of shadow on the stone. The thrum filled my head, a physical presence. My own heart hammered a frantic counterpoint. Every nerve screamed retreat. I took a step forward. The water, shockingly cold, bit through the thick rubber. Ripples spread, distorting the reflected azure into writhing shapes. The tunnel curved subtly leftward, its floor sloping steeply down. The air grew frigid, my breath plumed white. 50 feet in, the passage widened into a chamber, circular, perhaps 30 feet across. The ceiling soared into absolute darkness, far beyond my lamp's dying reach. The blue light pulsed from everywhere and nowhere. The humming was almost a pain now, a pressure behind the eyes. Centered in the chamber, rising from the deeper water, stood a column. Metal, yet unlike any metal I knew. Not steel, not copper, its surface fluid, mercurial, seeming to shift and flow. It vibrated, a perfect physical manifestation of the sound. Symbols, or perhaps letters, were incised upon it, alien characters that shimmered and warped, hurting my eyes when I tried to focus. The water girdling its base was different, unnaturally clear, profoundly deep, and as I watched, mesmerized, something stirred beneath that clarity, something vast. My lamp died. The blue radiance flared, pulsing faster, urgent now. The thrum climbed the scale, a high, piercing frequency that made my fillings ache. I recoiled, stumbling backward, but my feet dragged, the water suddenly viscous, thick as syrup. A hand seized my ankle. I crashed backward into the freezing water. Not a hand. Worse, a tendril of liquid metal, the same protean substance as the column, coiled around my leg. Impossibly strong, burning cold. I kicked, thrashed, panic lending strength, but more metallic pseudopods erupted from the depths, seeking purchase with chilling intent. My scream was swallowed by the chamber's immensity as the first tendril constricted. The pressure was colossal. I felt the bone in my ankle give, a sickening crack that sent agony lancing up my leg. More tendrils snaked around my other leg, my arms, my chest, pinning me, drawing me inexorably toward the vibrating column. The blue light blinded. The humming became a roar that obliterated thought. Through the glare, I glimpsed motion in the depths, geometries that defied reason, shapes that twisted the eye. Dragged closer, inch by agonizing inch. My flailing hand brushed something hard in my pocket. The radio. With a final surge of adrenaline, I wrenched it free, fumbled for the transmit button. Instead of static, a piercing whine erupted from the speaker, impossibly loud. The tendrils flinched, recoiling as if struck. Their grip slackened. I scrambled backward through the resisting water, crab walking until my back hit the cold stone of the chamber wall. The radio's shriek escalated and the column responded, vibrating with destructive violence. cracks spiderwebbed across its fluid surface, bleeding more quicksilver into the churning water. The blue light strobed erratically, the humming fractured, turning discordant, jagged with fury. The chamber began to shudder. Stone fragments rained from the unseen ceiling, splashing around me. Using the wall, I hauled myself upright, agony screaming from my shattered ankle. The radio grew hot, searing my palm, but I clung to it. I began to move, hugging the wall toward the tunnel entrance. The column was disintegrating, dissolving into the roiling water. The blue light pulsed like a dying star, casting manic shadows that seemed to writhe with independent life. More tendrils rose, but they kept their distance from the radio's sonic assault. The ceiling was coming down. I half ran, half limped back up the impossible tunnel, fighting the rising tide. Each step was a fresh wave of pain. Behind me, a sound, immense, catastrophic, something breaking free. I didn't look back. The tunnel stretched impossibly long. Water surged waist deep now. The radio became unbearable, scorching hot. Just as I reached the junction with the main drainage tunnel, I dropped it. It hissed as it hit the water. The whine ceased. The humming died. A heartbeat of absolute silence descended. Then a new sound, rushing water but distorted, guttural, gaining rapidly. I ran. Pain vanished, consumed by raw terror. I splashed through the main tunnel, the wall markers blurring past. Gamma 9, Gamma 8, Gamma 7. The sound pursued, swelling. Something slammed into my back, stealing my breath. I staggered, recovered, pushed on. Gamma 6, Gamma 5, light ahead. Blessed, mundane surface light filtering down a distant shaft. Still 100 yards. Lungs burned, legs turned to lead. The presence behind me was palpable, a physical weight. More impacts, my back, legs, head, not water. Droplets of the liquid metal seeking purchase, burning like dry ice where they touched. I shook them off, drove harder. 50 yards. The light beckoned. 20. The ladder rungs, slick with grime. 10 yards. Something wrapped around my broken ankle again. A scream tore from my throat as I kicked backward, blindly, desperately. My boot connected with something yielding yet solid, something that should not have been there. The grip released. 5 yards. The ladder. I lunged, caught the lowest rung, pulled. Arms screaming protest. Below, the water churned, boiled. I climbed, faster than I knew possible, rung after agonizing rung. Reaching the top, I heaved the manhole cover aside. Sunlight stabbed my eyes. I dragged myself onto the pavement, rolling clear. Horns blared. Voices shouted, ignored. A geyser erupted from the open manhole. Not water, but the liquid metal thrusting skyward, attempting to follow. It hung for a fraction of a second, twisting into Escher-like contortions. Then the raw sunlight struck it. The metal effervesced, dissolving instantly into a fine, shimmering mist that vanished on the breeze. The geyser collapsed inward. With a final resonant clang, the heavy iron cover slid back into place, seemingly of its own accord. I lay on the sidewalk, gulping air. My clothes soaked in tunnel effluent, steamed in the afternoon heat. My ankle throbbed mercilessly. Small, perfectly circular burns patterned my back and legs. Faces swam above me, concern etched upon them, voices asking questions I couldn't answer, summoning help. My gaze remained fixed on the manhole cover. Ordinary, utterly mundane, just another metal disc set in the asphalt sea of the city, but I could feel it, the resonance. Fainter now, a ghost of its former self, yet undeniably present, vibrating up through the concrete, through the soles of my remaining boot, into my very bones. Waiting. The ambulance crew found severe hypothermia despite the 85-degree heat. Third-degree burns arranged like sinister constellations, and an ankle fractured in 3 places. They found something else too. Trace residues of an unidentifiable metallic compound clinging to my hair and clothes. 3 days later, those samples vanished from the city lab. My resignation landed on my supervisor's desk the following morning, accepted without comment. My final inspection report, sealed. The official story cited critical structural instability for the indefinite closure of that entire drainage section. Sometimes in the dead hours of the night, I find myself drawn to the pavement, pressing my ear to the cool ground, listening. The thrum endures, a subtle vibration moving through the deep earth beneath the city, growing stronger, I think, spreading through those old brick veins like some abyssal mycelium. I know what slumbers down there now. I know what waits in the wet dark, feeding, expanding, and I know with chilling certainty that someday the interference, the static, the desperate cries of a dying radio won't be enough. The next time it reaches, it won't let go. Nobody believes the ravings of a broken man. How could they? It's just infrastructure, isn't it? Just tunnels and drains, monuments to Victorian engineering. Nothing more. But if you read this, if these words find you, avoid the manholes in the North Quarter. Give the storm drains a wide berth. And should you ever feel it, that low, persistent thrum rising from below, run. Run until your lungs give out, because it remembers me. And now it knows you're listening. That monolithic government edifice held its secrets deep, especially on the day I, Elias, first crossed its threshold. An early arrival, fueled by the naive hope of swift orientation, found me contemplating its facade. Impassive gray walls, a squat structure of indeterminate floors, windows like vacant eyes staring outwards. Yet whispers circulated about the warren beneath, tunnels snaking hundreds of feet into the earth's embrace. It was down there, they murmured, amidst archival dust and forgotten records, in a subterranean repository few acknowledged, that my hours would dissolve. I affected indifference. Basements were familiar territory. Landscapes of poor lumens, stagnant air, perhaps the scuttling calligraphy of insects. The true depth, the sheer absence of light awaiting me, remained an unimagined quantity. My assignment began in a cramped first-floor office, where a pallid clerk, a Mr. Finch, furnished me with a list dictating the boxes I was to unearth, chronicle, and impose order upon. He unfurled a schematic of the lower level, a labyrinth of shelving rows, sequestered storage chambers, and a grand corridor encircling several locked vaults. Into my hand he pressed a clinking ring of keys and a flashlight, a distressingly diminutive cylinder that inspired little confidence. "Spare batteries," I ventured, a slow shake of his head. "Supply closet near the elevator, basement level should you require sundries." His finger gestured towards the door accessing the main stairwell. With mumbled thanks, I turned and descended. The stairwell exhaled the scent of perpetual damp, concrete weeping into the air. Each footfall became a percussive echo against the flickering insistence of the overhead fluorescence. By the time I reached the basement proper, a clammy film had gathered on my palms. The atmosphere thickened, suffocating, devoid of any discernible ventilation. Dim bulbs studded the hallway ceiling, though most appeared extinguished, their filaments long surrendered. My flashlight beam sliced through the gloom, revealing ranks of skeletal filing cabinets, some gap-toothed where drawers had vanished, others sealed by the orange bloom of rust. The walls bore the dark stigmata of chronic water seepage. The concrete floor buckled and cracked in places. From some unseen recess, a faint, rhythmic drip punctuated the silence, the sound of water patiently eroding stone. Guided by the map's faded lines, I navigated to a wide artery that opened into a cavernous room, dominated by metal shelving. These monoliths groaned under the accumulated weight of decades. Brittle folders, ledgers bound in decaying covers, sheaves of documents cinched with twine that threatened to crumble at a touch. I deposited my satchel, containing my personal notepad, a pen, and the binder destined to become the catalog, and located the switch for the section's solitary overhead light. It spasmed momentarily before casting a jaundiced, inadequate glow across the towering stacks. Dust motes swirled in lazy galaxies. Each inhalation felt granular, freighted with the taste of mold. My task commenced with the tentative breaching of the initial boxes. Labels, bleached by time, yielded their secrets only under the direct interrogation of my flashlight. Reference numbers, cryptic titles, I transcribed them onto my notepad. Initially, the contents were mundane. Yellowed property records, permits ossified by bureaucratic time. Yet, moving along the subsequent row, I unearthed a file detailing recurrent repairs on a sub-basement level. Structural infirmities plagued the tunnels, it stated, accompanied by reports of occupants hearing inexplicable noises. Building settling, I reasoned. The groans of aging metal, the thermal sighs of pipes, prosaic explanations. A couple of hours bled away. A need to stretch, to understand the geography of my confinement, prompted me to explore the corridor further. I extinguished the overhead bulb, conserving its feeble energy, surrendering to the flashlight's narrow cone. The silence down there wasn't mere quiet. It was a palpable pressure, the darkness leaning in. My own respiration sounded unnaturally loud. Then another sound intruded, slow, deliberate footsteps. My first thought, another soul, a custodian perhaps, or security. But the source remained elusive, the steps receding only to circle back, their echo distorting direction. I froze, listening, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The footsteps eventually dissolved into the profound stillness. No one materialized. Nerves, I told myself. Old plumbing settling, the echo of my own passage. The following day saw me better equipped, armed with a more substantial flashlight brought from home and clad in a light jacket against the basement's pervasive damp chill. Turning into the main corridor, my gaze snagged on something new. Fresh impressions in the thick dust carpeting the floor, partial prints, suggestive of a heavy boot or work shoe, a single set leading deeper into the subterranean network. Curiosity overriding caution, I trailed them for several yards before they abruptly ceased where the concrete floor was drier, less receptive to inscription. A frown creased my brow. The singularity disturbed me, one set of prints leading in. No corresponding trail marked a return. Logic dictated passage both ways. Shaking my head, I forced myself back to the cataloging. Near a crumbling stack, I discovered an old wooden desk, its drawers yielding a small trove of reports spanning various years. Each chronicled employees dispatched to the sub-basement for maintenance or inventory duties. Penciled annotations on several pages hinted at unexplained departures, not deaths, but simple, irreversible absences. One account detailed a man leaving a half-eaten sandwich in the break area, never to reclaim it. Another described a supervisor meticulously locking up one evening, only to vanish by morning, his keys resting starkly on the floor. The script on that particular note trembled, a final line mentioning a hooded figure observed near the deeper tunnels. A visceral chill traced my spine, incongruous in the muggy air. I gathered the reports, setting them aside with a growing disquiet. After a brief respite, I ventured towards the basement's far reaches, repository of the most ancient records. Here, the corridor plunged into deeper shadow, the ceiling weeping more insistently, water pooling on the floor below. I tried to move quietly, but every shuffle, every rustle of my jacket seemed amplified, thrown back at me by the oppressive dark. My flashlight beam quivered, betraying the tension knotting my hands. The place radiated a malevolent ambiance, though I couldn't articulate why. Reaching a door marked Archive Room D, I pushed it open. The air inside was thick with must, underscored by a peculiar scent reminiscent of old, decaying leather. Boxes slumped in one corner. A stark metal cabinet stood sentinel against the far wall. A faint scuffling sound broke the quiet. My light swept across the floor, catching a rat, sleek and dark, as it darted into a fissure in the wall. I exhaled sharply, unaware I'd been holding my breath. The remainder of the afternoon was consumed by the methodical rhythm of sorting, affixing new tags, scribbling notes on contents. Yet the tension coiled tighter in my shoulders. Every few minutes I'd pause, straining to hear beyond my own presence. Occasionally, a soft scrape would reach me, like a shoe dragging reluctantly across concrete. At other times, a sound like a sibilant whisper seemed to brush the edge of hearing. Each time my flashlight beam stabbed into the indicated direction, revealing only weeping walls and silent rows of boxes. Sweat pasted my shirt to my back. My throat felt parched. I hadn't brought sufficient water. I resolved to conclude the day earlier than intended. Day 3. I opted for the elevator, a slow, groaning cage, hoping for the incidental company of another human being. The doors wheezed open onto the familiar blast of stale air. Down the corridor, a right turn, and then flickering light beckoned from the far end. Approaching, I identified a small maintenance alcove, illuminated by a single naked bulb dangling from the ceiling. A squeaky utility cart laden with cleaning supplies stood near the entrance, abandoned. Yet no custodian was present. "Hello?" My voice caromed off the damp surfaces, returning unanswered. No note, no sign of the worker. The cart appeared recently used. A bucket held murky water, but the surrounding dust lay remarkably undisturbed, save for a few random scuffs near the cart itself. No footprints. Resuming my archival duties around midday, I uncovered another sheaf of documents pertaining to the sub-basement. These were older still, typewritten reports detailing expansions of the tunnel system. One sentence alluded cryptically to hidden passages linking disparate wings of the building. Another included a crude diagram dated from the 1920s. A prickling sensation arose, the feeling of trespassing on forbidden knowledge. The deeper I read, the more frequent the references became to a hooded figure, an ephemeral presence haunting the deeper corridors at unpredictable intervals. Employee accounts spoke of an unnerving sensation of being watched. One stark sentence commanded, "Do not speak of what you've seen. Leave it in the dark." A knot formed in my stomach. I carefully placed the papers into a folder and slipped them into my satchel, torn between presenting them to Finch upstairs and an urgent, illicit desire to continue reading. By the fourth day, the pervasive odors and gloom had become almost normalized. Yet the feeling of observation intensified, clinging like the dampness itself. Each corner turned carried the electric anticipation of confronting a shadow, a form lurking just beyond the light's reach. My nerves felt frayed, exposed. The slightest sound, a drip, a creak, sent adrenaline jolting through me. Rationalizations about creepy old basements offered diminishing solace. The footsteps were the worst. Intermittent, circling, sometimes sounding impossibly close, prompting me to whirl around, flashlight raised like a weapon, only to illuminate empty, indifferent concrete. Cold sweat bloomed frequently. That afternoon, I pushed deeper into the tunnels than ever before. Defunct lamps clung to the walls like metallic fungi. My beam painted shifting mosaics of moisture and viridian mold. The air grew heavier, more stagnant. I encountered a formidable locked steel door bearing an aged plaque, "Archive Secure Vault." My keys proved useless against it. Moving onward, I detected a faint draft, its source indeterminate. The corridor bifurcated, a deviation absent from my map. I chose the rightward path. Here, the walls roughened, the construction less finished, transitioning towards something more akin to a natural cavern than a man-made passage. The footsteps resumed, unmistakable now. Steady, slow, mirroring my own cadence. I stopped. They stopped. My stomach clenched. "Is anyone down here?" The question echoed, swallowed by the vastness and the incessant dripping. Silence answered. I took a tentative step forward. The footsteps recommenced, seemingly just behind me, perhaps 10 or 15 feet distant. Yet, when I spun around, the corridor stretched empty into the receding darkness. Tremors began in my hands. My breathing grew shallow, rapid. My pulse hammered against my temples. I pressed on, sweeping the light across the walls, searching desperately for an alcove, a room, any refuge. A small doorway appeared. I slipped inside. The footsteps continued past my hiding place. Steady, unhurried. A paradoxical wave washed over me, relief tangled with a newly profound dread. Whatever haunted this place had passed me by. After a tense minute, I emerged back into the corridor. It eventually sloped downwards, terminating at another flight of stairs descending into further blackness. The old reports had hinted at a lower level, unconfirmed in recent memory. I directed my light down the steps. The stone treads were worn smooth, scarred by cracks and water stains. An instinct screamed against venturing deeper, yet curiosity, that insistent siren, pulled me onward. Each step down was carefully placed, its echo amplified in the confined space. At the bottom, the passage angled sharply left. The air here felt distinctly colder, a stark contrast to the oppressive humidity above. Ahead, around the bend, a faint, unsteady light flickered. I advanced cautiously, hugging the rough wall, my heart laboring painfully in my chest. Rounding the corner, I beheld a wide archway, opening into what appeared to be an ancient storeroom, shelves lining its periphery. Upon a wooden crate rested a single lantern, its small flame sputtering, casting dancing shadows. The lantern itself looked archaic, belonging to another era. Keeping my flashlight aimed forward, I stepped closer. A soft shuffle sounded directly behind me. I spun. There it stood, perhaps 6 feet away, a figure cloaked and hooded in darkness, its features utterly obscured. It remained perfectly still, silent, effectively blocking the corridor. My throat constricted, my legs locked. A cascade of frantic thoughts. Guard, intruder, something else. I lifted my flashlight higher, attempting to penetrate the cowl's shadow. The figure retreated a single step, the faint scrape of its foot audible on the stone floor. Words failed me, caught somewhere between my lungs and lips. Finally, I forced out a ragged whisper. "Who are you?" Only silence answered. The posture remained unnervingly constant. I began to inch backward, my gaze fixed upon it. My flashlight beam wavered, threatening to fail. A frantic tap restored its steady glow. In that brief flicker, the figure vanished. Utterly, the corridor stood empty. No sound of retreat, no footsteps fading into the distance. I swept the beam frantically over the spot. Nothing. My heart hammered with such violence I felt momentarily dizzy. Turning back to the storeroom, I impulsively reached for the lantern on the crate. Noticing its fuel was nearly exhausted, it guttered, dimmed further. I replaced it. The room reeked of old wax and sodden wood. Retreat. The imperative screamed through me. I hurried back the way I'd come, my own footsteps now loud, echoing recklessly. I didn't care who heard. The pursuing footsteps started again, shadowing mine, but this time I refused to look back. My skin prickled, convinced something unseen trailed inches behind me. Reaching the stairs, I scrambled up them 2 at a time, bolting towards the distant promise of the elevator. I stabbed the call button repeatedly, glancing compulsively over my shoulder. The corridor remained vacant. The elevator's arrival felt agonizingly slow, the overhead light inside flickering ominously as the doors slid open. I stumbled in, slammed the button for the ground floor, and leaned against the cool metal wall, gasping for breath. During the slow ascent, the day's events replayed in a terrifying loop. The prints, the files, the chilling reports, the hooded specter. Anxiety warred with an insistent, undeniable curiosity about the secrets still entombed in those boxes. Something resided in those depths, something protective of its buried history. I felt scrutinized, perhaps tested. When the doors finally opened onto the ground floor, the normalcy felt jarring. Bright lights, the distant murmur of office life, phones ringing, muffled conversations. Relief washed over me, yet my heart still raced, my shirt clinging, soaked through. I made straight for Mr. Finch's office. I presented a few of the documents, the ones mentioning the hooded figure. and asked point blank if he knew anything. His expression shuddered. He shook his head, his gaze skittering away from mine. It was better, he advised, his tone carefully neutral, to focus on the assigned task. The sub-basement was old, prone to generating rumors. People get spooked easily down there, he murmured. Just complete your inventory, Elias. Best not to stir things up. I nodded mutely, but his deflection solidified my resolve. Something was profoundly wrong in that subterranean world, and I felt an undeniable compulsion to uncover it. Despite the terror clawing at me, I knew I would return tomorrow. Those files, those tunnels, held answers I now desperately needed. Sleep offered little sanctuary that night. Each time my eyes closed, the hooded figure materialized in the corridor of my mind, triggering a jolt of adrenaline that left my heart pounding. My throat felt raw, my muscles aching from the tension and the flight. I wrestled with the sheets, with the urge to resign, to flee this oppressive assignment. But the questions gnawed relentlessly. Curiosity, sharp and insistent, demanded answers. I rose the next morning with a grim determination. My approach would be methodical, prepared. Fresh batteries, the larger flashlight, even a small handheld radio. A hopeful, perhaps futile, attempt at connection. Reaching the basement level, the familiar heavy air greeted me like a shroud. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I switched on my light and began the long walk into the gloom. My objective, I told myself, was simple. Finish cataloging the main area, retrieve pertinent records, and depart. Yet the branching side tunnels seemed to hum with a silent invitation, and almost immediately they began. The footsteps, slow, measured, echoing through the damp, waiting corridors. I pushed forward, the thrum of my own pulse loud in my ears, uncertain of what lay ahead, but acutely aware that I was not alone. Aware that the figure was there, watching, perhaps waiting for me to read precisely what I was not supposed to see. Hindsight sharpens the edges of foolishness. Mine arrived with the definitive thunk of central locking, the sound echoing the sudden closure of hope. By then, the compass of my mistake was sickeningly clear. We were arrowing deeper into nowhere. The man beside me, no longer the Samaritan, wore a mask stripped bare, revealing the predator beneath. And the desert, vast and indifferent, stretched its canvas of desolation to every horizon. It began, as betrayals often do, under the guise of misfortune. My old Voyager, stalwart for years, finally surrendered its mechanical ghost, sputtering into silence on a forgotten thread of highway, cleaving through New Mexico's arid heart. Hours I'd driven, hypnotized by the monotonous scroll of sand and skeletal brush. Sunset flared across the western sky, a breathtaking palette of ochre and violet I couldn't savor, choked as I was by the sudden, terrifying realization of being utterly stranded. Futile turns of the key yielded only a pathetic whine. My phone, a useless brick, displayed only mocking silence, no bars, stuck, utterly, unequivocally stuck. Then twin lights bloomed in the deepening twilight. A wave of relief, potent and dizzying, washed over me. Salvation on wheels, surely, or at least a lift toward civilization. An aging pickup, its paint faded by sun and time, slowed, pulling alongside. The window descended, revealing a man whose face was a roadmap etched by wind and sun. His smile seemed genuine, his eyes crinkling at the corners. bit of trouble. The voice, raspy like stones tumbling in a dry creek bed, held a note of kindness. I nodded, the words tumbling out. The dead engine, the useless phone. He listened, head cocked, then offered passage to the next town. Hour or so up the road, he offered. Get a tow called from there. A flicker of caution, my mother's ingrained warnings about strangers echoing in the anxious space behind my ribs. But the alternative? A night alone in this immense silence, prey to exposure or worse. That would be incredible. I managed, hoisting my backpack from the Voyager's passenger seat. Thank you truly. He called himself Silas as I settled into the cab. The air hung thick with the scent of old leather and stale tobacco smoke. A mournful country tune wept softly from the radio. We traced the usual lines of roadside conversation. My destination, a fresh start, Los Angeles. My origins, a forgettable Ohio town. My connections, college friends awaiting their new roommate. He, in turn, painted himself a native son of this unforgiving land, claiming intimacy with its secrets, knowing the desert like the lines on my own hand. Perhaps 20 minutes slipped by before the first tendrils of unease coiled in my stomach. Something in the cadence of Silas's questions, a probing intensity in his gaze when it lingered. It felt wrong. I tried to dismiss it, misplaced paranoia perhaps. He was just being neighborly. But then a detail snagged my attention, pulling the thread that unraveled everything. We were driving east. The sun, which had been sinking directly ahead when we first set off, now blazed accusingly through the driver's side window, painting his profile in harsh relief. Silas, I ventured, striving for nonchalance, my voice a thin reed. Shouldn't the town be west, back the way we came from? Silence stretched, taut and heavy. When he finally spoke, the earlier warmth had evaporated, leaving his tone flat, metallic. No, he stated, eyes fixed on the road ahead. This is the way. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Instinctively, my hand shot to the door handle, locked, child-proofed, a cage on wheels. Where are you taking me? The tremor in my voice betrayed the terror I could no longer mask. A slow smile crept across Silas's lips, a chilling distortion of his earlier expression. Somewhere quiet, he murmured. Somewhere we won't be bothered. Raw panic flared. My eyes darted around the cab, desperate for leverage, a weapon, anything. The truck's interior was unnervingly tidy. No stray tools, no forgotten tire iron beneath the seat. Nothing. Please, I whispered, hating the weakness that frayed my voice. Just let me go. I won't say a word, I swear. His laugh was a harsh, grating sound that scraped against my nerves. Oh, I know you won't say a word, he rasped. Nobody ever does. The chilling implication struck me with physical force. Not the first time. How many others? How many vehicles sat abandoned like mine? Silent monuments to vanished travelers. We drove on, swallowed by a silence thick with unspoken menace, the miles spooling out into an endless, terrifying unknown. My mind scrabbled for an escape route, a plan, finding only dead ends. Trapped with a man whose intentions were becoming brutally clear, plunging deeper into a wilderness utterly alien to me. Just as despair threatened to engulf me completely, Silas wrenched the wheel, turning off the asphalt ribbon onto a jarring dirt track. The pickup bucked and groaned, jostling us deeper into the scrubland, erasing any faint hope of encountering another vehicle. Time stretched and warped. Perhaps 20 minutes passed, perhaps an eternity, before he finally killed the engine. We sat in a small clearing, hemmed in by thorny bushes and monolithic rock formations that clawed at the moonlit sky. It possessed a stark, brutal beauty, but I knew this stage was set for something far uglier than sightseeing. "Out," Silas commanded, his voice flat. From beneath his seat, he produced a handgun, its dark metal gleaming dully. My legs turned to unreliable water as I stumbled from the cab. He followed, the gun unwavering, aimed squarely at me. "Walk," he ordered, gesturing with the barrel toward a narrow defile snaking between two towering boulders. Flight screamed through my veins, but a single glance at the vast, empty panorama suffocated the impulse. Run where? Even if I miraculously outpaced him, the desert itself would claim me long before I found help. So I walked, thoughts racing, a frantic search for an exit from this waking nightmare. Could I reason with him? Appeal to some buried shred of humanity? "You don't have to do this," I pleaded, my voice trembling uncontrollably. "Whatever you're thinking, it's not too late to change your mind." He offered no reply, only a sharp prod from the gun's muzzle, urging me onward. 10 minutes, maybe less. The path wound onward before opening onto the shadowed maw of a small cave. My stomach plummeted. This was it. The place he intended to end things. "Inside," he grunted. I balked, my gaze sweeping the surroundings in a final desperate inventory. And then I saw it. A flicker of reflected moonlight, not off rock but off metal, half submerged in the sand near the cave entrance. A length of rebar, rust-pitted, likely debris from some forgotten construction. Primal instinct surged, overriding fear. I launched myself toward it, fingers scrabbling, closing around the coarse, cold steel just as Silas registered my movement. He lunged, a guttural snarl ripping from his throat, but adrenaline made me faster. I swung the heavy bar with every ounce of strength I possessed, connecting solidly with his extended forearm. A strangled howl of pain erupted from him. The gun spun from his grasp, arcing through the air. I didn't wait to see where it landed. I ran with a desperation I hadn't known I possessed, scrambling over unforgiving rock, tearing through thorny brush that ripped at my clothes and skin. Behind me, I heard his enraged curses, the heavy crashing of his pursuit through the undergrowth. Directionless, propelled only by terror, I pushed onward. My lungs burned, muscles screamed, but the fear was a relentless engine. I clawed my way up a steep, scree-covered incline, loose stones clattering beneath my desperate scrabble. Cresting the rise, I saw them, distant pinpricks of light. A town, a highway, it didn't matter. It was civilization. It was hope. I started down the opposite slope, reckless in my haste. My foot snagged on a hidden root. The world tilted, spun, and I tumbled, rolling helplessly down the rocky hillside. I landed in a bruised heap at the bottom, momentarily stunned, gasping for air. Then the sound froze me. Footsteps, heavy and uneven, descending the slope I'd just tumbled down. Ignoring the fire shooting through my twisted ankle, I forced myself upright. Not now, not this close. I lurched forward, half limping, half running, the distant lights growing fractionally larger, brighter. Behind me, Silas's ragged breathing grew louder, closer. Just as my legs threatened to buckle completely, I burst from the scrub onto pavement, smooth, solid asphalt, and bearing down on me, headlights blazing like divine intervention, was a car. I waved my arms, stumbling into its path. Tires shrieked as the vehicle skidded to a halt inches away. An elderly couple stared out, faces etched with alarm and confusion. "Help me!" I choked out, pointing back into the darkness. "Please, he's trying to kill me." A heartbeat of hesitation. Then the woman leaned across and threw open the rear door. "Get in, dear," she urged. I scrambled inside, collapsing onto the back seat, just as Silas's dark form emerged from the brush at the roadside. "Go!" I screamed. The driver needed no further prompting. The engine roared, tires spitting gravel, and we surged forward, leaving Silas a rapidly shrinking silhouette against the immense, swallowing darkness of the desert night. The next town brought the sanctuary of a police station. The story poured out of me between ragged breaths and shuddering sobs. They found my Voyager abandoned as I'd left it. They found Silas's pickup near the cave, empty. But of Silas himself, there was no trace. He had dissolved back into the desert, the landscape he knew like his own skin. Sometimes the night brings echoes of that terror. The click of the lock, the cold smile, the vast emptiness. What if the rebar hadn't been there? What if that car hadn't come? But mostly, I carry the chilling knowledge of how thin the veneer of safety can be, how close I came to becoming another statistic, another ghost haunting the roadside. I don't offer rides, nor do I accept them lightly, and before any long journey, I listen to the hum of my engine, ensuring its strength. Because the monsters, I learned, aren't always relegated to shadows and stories. Sometimes they stand in the harsh light of day, smiling, waiting beside a broken-down car, offering salvation that leads only to the darkest depths. This isn't a confession I ever intended to articulate, yet the silence has become unbearable. Beneath my house, in the damp, earth-smelling cellar, stands a locked door. From beyond its obstinate planks, something calls my name, Elias. Not metaphorically, you understand. A literal, audible invocation filtering through the aged wood. It began one starless night and has woven itself into the fabric of my existence since. I need to unravel this knot of dread thread by thread, because the strain of questioning my sanity within these four walls is becoming a crushing weight. 6 months have drifted past since I acquired this property, a modest 2-story structure, complete with a porch prone to groaning underfoot, a kitchen stubbornly rooted in a bygone era, and that pervasive subterranean dampness. Initially, the place exuded tranquility, a quietude I craved. The cellar door, ancient and secured, registered immediately during my first exploratory descent, yet sparked little concern. Its padlock, a formidable chunk of rusted iron, hinges like reinforced knuckles, wood dense and unyielding. I recall giving it an experimental pull back then. It remained utterly indifferent. A forgotten storeroom, I surmised, belonging to lives lived here before mine. No key materialized, and the chaos of settling in claimed my attention. I left it to its secrets. The first weeks were a blur of domesticity. walls shedding old skins for new coats of paint, furniture finding its place in a hesitant choreography. Work consumed the daylight hours, demanding early departures and late returns. The cellar, consequently, devolved into a repository for the unwanted. Cast-off clothing, boxes bristling with tools, the general detritus of a life in transit. The locked threshold faded into the background hum of the house, a sealed enigma I felt no compulsion to solve. Upstairs, life presented challenges enough. Then arrived the night it began. Sleep was drawing near, a welcome tide around midnight, when a faint, repetitive sound snagged my attention. Distant, almost subliminal. An errant branch against glass, perhaps. I rose, padded through the quiet house, inspected windows veiled in darkness. Nothing amiss. Returning to bed, I sought the receding shores of slumber, but the sound amplified. A tapping, no, a knocking, measured, deliberate. A knot tightened low in my gut. I became acutely aware of the frantic drummer beneath my ribs. The source, I realized with a chilling certainty, lay beneath my feet. It emanated from the cellar. Panic isn't my default response to nocturnal noises, but this felt intrinsically different. It possessed a cadence, a rhythm that precluded randomness. Pauses punctuated the knocks, pregnant silences that felt like anticipation, as if awaiting acknowledgement. Flashlight clutched in a suddenly slick hand, feet hastily shoved into shoes. I descended. Each stair groaned a protest. The air grew palpably colder, or was it merely the ice forming along my veins? Reaching the cellar door at the top of the stairs, the knocking ceased abruptly. I swung the door inward, fumbled for the switch. The single bulb cast a weak, jaundiced glow, illuminating the path across the concrete floor towards the far wall, towards that door. The main space was still, empty. Cautiously, I stepped down, knuckles white on the banister, the flashlight beam trembling like a captured nerve. My own breathing sounded unnaturally loud, shallow gasps in the waiting dark. I advanced towards the locked barrier. Superficially, nothing had changed. The padlock hung heavy, shedding flakes of rust like metallic dandruff. Then a flicker of movement in the wood itself, a subtle outward pulse, instantaneous and unsettling. I froze, legs turned into water, a strange heat flaring in my chest. The flashlight beam zeroed in, unwavering. Again the surface flexed as though something yielding pressed against it from the hidden side. And then my name, Elias. Not shouted, barely more than a breath, yet utterly distinct. It carried the impossible intimacy of someone standing inches away, murmuring through the solid wood. Instinct screamed retreat. I backed away, a primal urge to flee warring with the absurdity of calling anyone at this hour with such a tale. The knocking didn't resume, but my name, Elias, reverberated in the echo chamber of my skull. I scanned the cellar desperately, seeking logic, a draft, peculiar acoustics from the plumbing. But pipes don't form syllables. Pipes don't whisper your name. One last lingering look at the door. Then I retreated backward up the stairs, refusing to turn my back. Upstairs, I secured the cellar entrance from the inside, a flimsy gesture against the formless dread. Sleep, when it came, was a tattered, restless thing. The following day was an exercise in determined denial. Emails awaited answers, errands beckoned. It was fatigue, I told myself, a waking dream born of stress. Yet, as dusk bled into evening, the house settled into its watchful quiet, and a familiar unease coiled within me. Television offered flimsy distraction. My thoughts strayed inexorably downward towards the locked planks. Curiosity, sharp and insidious, battled with a profound, gut-level reluctance. I needed to know. I needed to listen again. But the memory of that voice, its chilling proximity, anchored me with dread. Around 11, resolve hardened. If it happened again, I vowed, I would confront it. Predictably, near the stroke of midnight, the summons began anew. The same slow, methodical pattern, spaced as if conserving energy, or perhaps measuring my response time. I rose from the couch, flashlight retrieved, and compelled myself down the cellar stairs. The instant my soles met the cold concrete, the knocking's tempo shifted. It accelerated, grew frantic, almost eager, as if it sensed my presence. I stopped, perhaps 10 feet shy of the threshold. The flashlight beam painted the door, revealing the wood quivering minutely with each impact. A stale, faintly earthy aroma tainted the air, seeming to seep from beneath the barrier. My mouth was dust. My palms felt clammy. The knocking ceased. Silence descended thick and expectant. Then the voice, twice this time, my name spoken with unnerving clarity, separated by a few heartbeats. Elias, Elias. A tremor traced my spine. My pulse throbbed violently in my neck. My heart felt dangerously close to bursting free. With immense effort, I forced words out, my voice a shaky imitation of my own. "Who's there?" Silence answered. "Who is it?" Nothing. Tentatively, I reached out, placing my palm flat against the door. The wood felt cold, faintly damp. Then, impossibly, a faint pressure met mine from the other side, like a mirrored touch, palm to palm through the wood. Thought evaporated. I snatched my hand back as if burned, stumbled, whirled, and fled the cellar, slamming the upper door, fumbling with the lock. Sleep was a foreign country that night. My body remained taut, vibrating with residual adrenaline, a low-grade nausea churning beneath the surface. Not sickness, but pure, unadulterated tension. The ensuing days became a frantic search for a strategy. Open it, remove it. The options circled endlessly, each shadowed by a paralyzing fear of consequence. The voice hadn't sounded overtly hostile, yet the entire situation radiated wrongness. A locksmith confirmed my suspicion. The archaic padlock defied conventional methods. Bolt cutters. The thought alone brought a prickle of sweat to my skin, a constriction in my throat. Hesitation became my constant companion. Then it began infringing on daylight. Faint knocks, barely audible, while I brewed coffee in the kitchen. Brief, isolated taps punctuating the drone of the television, always from below. Relaxation became an impossibility. My nerves frayed, stretched taut. Benign house sounds, settling timbers, the refrigerator's hum, became startling intrusions. The house itself felt complicit, watchful. One afternoon, armed with a hammer, I descended, resolved to test the hinges, probe for weakness. As I drew near, I perceived that subtle shift again, an almost imperceptible movement suggesting respiration beyond the wood. My legs trembled. I retreated a few paces, gathering frayed courage, forcing slow breaths against the frantic pounding in my chest. "Just do it," I commanded myself. Stepping forward, I tested the hinge with the hammer's claw. Rusted nails held fast, immovable. The door emitted a low groan like stressed timber, and then a whisper, so faint it was almost imagined, yet unmistakably directed. "Stop!" I froze, the single word echoing in the sudden stillness. Then I scrambled, nearly tumbling back up the stairs. That was the moment the decision solidified. The door would remain sealed forever. Days bled into weeks. The presence behind the barrier grew bolder, less subtle. Random shuffling sounds drifted up, low susurrations like breath drawn and released. My vigilance became constant, exhausting. The cellar was now hostile territory, entered only for dire necessities. Laundry, a forgotten tool, each trip fraught with tension. Nightfall brought escalation. The knocking intensified, sometimes persisting for an hour, punctuated by brief, unnerving silences. My name, Elias, repeated intermittently, always in that same dispassionate tone. Not angry, not pleading, simply stating, as if testing the sound, ensuring its reception. Occasionally, standing upstairs, I'd feel a faint vibration through the floorboards, a sickening resonance that suggested displaced air below. Sleep offered no refuge. Even with headphones, the percussion seemed to travel through bone, felt rather than heard. Restless nights dissolved into days marked by fatigue and jumpiness, haunted by waking jolts and nightmares where the door would violently implode, revealing only darkness, yet the voice would persist, calling my name from the void. For a fragile sense of security, I installed a heavy-duty bolt lock on the upper cellar door, testing its solidity repeatedly. It offered meager comfort, a psychological barrier against an intangible threat. The nightmares continued unabated. One evening, desperate for normalcy, I invited Leo over. The cellar and its secret remained unspoken. We occupied the living room, shared beers, watched a game, an illusion of ordinary life shattered when a single faint knock resonated from below. Leo glanced at me, puzzled. I mumbled something about old pipes, forcing a shrug, feeling the blood drain from my face. He didn't press. He left hours later, plunging me back into the thick silence of the house, alone with its disquieting heartbeat. Existence narrowed, functionality frayed at the edges. Every step near the cellar stairs became hesitant. A sudden knock sent tremors through my hands. Darkness amplified the sounds, so lights burned throughout the night. I'd lie rigid in bed, counting breaths, anticipating the next soft rap, the next whispered invocation of my name. The true terror climaxed 2 nights ago. A necessary foray into the cellar, checking the water heater for leaks. I was near the room's center, stooped low when a sound scraped across the locked door. Distinct, unmistakable, like fingernails dragged slowly across wood grain. My stomach plummeted. I snapped upright, flashlight beam finding the door. The scraping ceased. I stood paralyzed, breath held captive, listening to the pounding silence. Then a single knock, heavier than before, resonant. My gaze locked onto the wood. I saw it bulge outward, not subtly this time, but a distinct protrusion of an inch, perhaps 2, before snapping violently back, as if yanked by an immense force from within. I staggered backward, balance deserting me. No words came, only flight. Up the stairs, 2 at a time, lungs burning, throat raw. I slammed the upper door, shot the bolt, then retreated, eyes fixed on the knob, half expecting it to twist. It remained still. Since that night, I haven't ventured down. The knocking persists, a relentless subterranean pulse I attempt to drown out with the artificial noise of television, of music. I move through the motions of living, cooking, cleaning, working, but always against the backdrop of that sealed threshold below, the knowledge of something waiting behind it, something that knows my name. It never shouts, it never pleads. It simply knocks and repeats Elias over and over, patient, persistent, waiting for the lock to yield. Leaving this place flickers through my mind, a tempting escape, but practicalities intrude. Selling a house with such a feature, impossible, and deeper, darker, a sliver of morbid compulsion remains, a need to understand what resides in that hidden space. The hammer, the crowbar, they sit nearby, tools of potential resolution, yet each time resolve gathers, the memory surfaces, that chilling pressure against my palm, the intimate whisper of my name in the dark, the final horrifying scrape against the wood. My legs become leaden, my hands betray me with tremors. I retreat upstairs once more. So I remain caught in this suffocating loop. I inhabit this house. I endure the knocking. I feign ignorance. Shadows make me flinch. Sometimes drawn by a perverse curiosity, I approach the upper cellar door, testing the limits of my own fear. The presence behind the locked planks shows no sign of fatigue. The knocks retain their strength. The voice, its quiet insistence. If anything, it feels more settled. Perhaps it cannot force its way out. Perhaps it merely waits for an invitation. For me to turn the key I don't possess. To break the seal, I truly don't know. It has been 2 days since my last descent. Tonight, around 11, 3 distinct, heavy knocks vibrated through the floor. I felt them in the soles of my feet. It spurred me to write this, to give shape to the dread. This isn't narrative flourish, this is the texture of my reality. Even now, as I type, I can hear it, the faint rhythmic tapping. My name, a low murmur, muffled but unwavering. Elias, Elias, how much longer can this fragile truce hold? My nerves are raw filaments. A dull ache throbs behind my eyes. My fingers tremble on the keys. I sit bathed in the artificial glare of every light in the living room, my breathing shallow and rapid. I crave a resolution I cannot fathom. All I know is the presence endures. The door remains locked, and I am here, a prisoner in my own home, locked in this silent, unending standoff with whatever waits on the other side. This timbered refuge by the water's edge, intended as Alara's haven, swiftly morphed into her cage. Her car crunched gravel, pulling alongside the cabin as twilight bled across the lake's placid surface, an amber luminescence promising serenity. The accumulated weight of recent months, a gnawing tension, seemed to dissipate with her first breath of cool, pine-sharp air. This weekend, stripped bare of connection. No signal bars, no glowing screens, no clamoring voices, was meant to be a balm. Just Alara, the quiet hum of her own mind, and the embrace of the wilderness. Her worn duffel swung from her shoulder as she ascended the protesting wooden stairs to the porch. The rental agency key, cold metal, turned smoothly in the lock. She pushed the door inward, anticipation humming within her, ready for an evening steeped in quietude. But the air inside was thick, not with dust and disuse, but with the scent of cedar mingling strangely with something savory, simmering. an unwelcome pulse of unease. The place felt occupied, inhabited. Stepping fully into the main room, her breath hitched, lodging painfully in her throat. By the hearth's glow sat a man, ensconced in an armchair, a leather-bound book resting open on his knee, a tumbler of dark liquid in his hand. His head snapped up at her entrance, surprise flickering in his eyes before hardening instantly into raw hostility. "Who in God's name are you?" he rasped, surging to his feet. Alara recoiled, the duffel slipping, hitting the floorboards with a dull thud that echoed the sudden pounding in her chest. I'm Alara," she managed, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. "I rented this cabin for the weekend. Who are you?" His gaze narrowed, sharp and suspicious. "My house. This is my house. Whatever story you've been sold, it's wrong. You need to leave. Right now." Her thoughts scrambled, a frantic search for logic. A mistake, surely. Her fingers, trembling slightly, retrieved her phone, the screen illuminating the confirmation email. "Look," she offered, extending the device like a shield. "Booked through Lakeside Retreats. The reservation's right here." He didn't spare it a glance. "Means nothing to me. This is my home. Years I've lived here. You're trespassing. Get out, or I involve the authorities." An icy tendril snaked down her spine. Something felt deeply skewed, off-kilter. Taking a hesitant step back, her hand groped behind her for the reassuring solidity of the doorknob. Okay, she placated, voice tight. "Clearly a misunderstanding. I'll head back and clear this up with the agency." As she turned, the scrape of his boots on the wood floor sounded too close. Before she could twist the knob, his hand slammed flat against the door, barring her exit. His breath, warm and unsettlingly close, ghosted the back of her neck as he leaned in. "Not happening," he murmured, the voice low, imbued with a chilling menace. "You've seen me. Can't have you running off, telling tales." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Slowly, she pivoted to face him. Up close, the wildness in his eyes was stark, his beard untrimmed, grime etched beneath his fingernails. This wasn't just residency, it was concealment. "Please," she whispered, the sound barely audible, fragile. "I won't say anything, just let me go." He shook his head, a smile devoid of humor twisting his lips. "Oh, Alara, you're not going anywhere at all." The ensuing hours dissolved into a miasma of visceral dread and frantic, silent prayers. Her phone met the unforgiving stone of the fireplace, the screen spiderwebbing into a mosaic of shattered hope. Duct tape, coarse and binding, secured her wrists. He propelled her into a cramped bedroom, the click of the lock sealing her fate. Perched on the edge of a thin mattress, her mind churned. How? She'd been meticulous, reputable agency, itinerary shared. Yet the very isolation she craved had become her snare, the silence amplifying her vulnerability. Through the flimsy partition of the wall, she heard him pacing, muttering fragments of sentences to himself. Each time his footfalls neared the door, her breath would catch, a silent plea for him to pass. He always did, the sounds receding, leaving her adrift again in terror. Night draped the cabin in shadow. She strained against her bonds in the oppressive darkness, every rustle of fabric magnified. With painstaking effort, she nudged the window sash open a fraction, admitting a sliver of cool air and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. Outside, serenity reigned, a cruel juxtaposition to the suffocating fear within. Time stretched, measured in strained listening, in eyes scanning the gloom for any potential weapon, any advantage. The moon climbed, etching skeletal branches across the floor. Then, faint but distinct, the distant thrum of an engine. Her heart surged, a desperate flare of optimism. Someone arriving? Scrambling to the window, she pressed her face to the cool pane. Headlights sliced through the trees, drawing nearer. Hope became action. She hammered on the glass, her voice raw and desperate, tearing through the quiet. "Help, please, help me." The vehicle slowed. She intensified her efforts, shouting, pleading, "In here, I'm trapped." Heavy, rapid footsteps pounded down the hallway. The bedroom door crashed open. He was on her in a heartbeat, one rough hand clamped over her mouth, the other yanking her bodily from the window. "Quiet," he hissed, the word hot against her ear. "Another sound, I swear." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. They stood frozen, a tableau of terror, his arm a rigid bar across her chest as the car pulled up outside. Doors opened, shut, voices called out, muffled but clear. "Hello? Occupant here?" Tears streamed, silent and hot, down Alara's face. Rescue, inches away, separated only by wood and plaster. His grip became vice-like as footsteps crunched on the porch gravel. A sharp rap echoed through the cabin. Lakeside Retreats had a report of a booking issue. Everything all right? A scream built in her throat, desperate to erupt, but the sudden, cold pressure of metal against her temple silenced it instantly. A gun materialized from nowhere. The message was unequivocal: silence or oblivion. They stood, barely breathing, suspended in time as the agency employees called out again, their voices tinged with uncertainty. An eternity seemed to pass before their retreating steps faded, the car engine dwindling into the vast, indifferent night. As the last vibration of the engine dissolved, his hold loosened fractionally. "Good girl," he murmured, the gun lowering slightly. "See? Cooperate and things go smoother." He nudged her back towards the bed, pushing her down. "Right. Plans change. Have to move. Can't stay, not now they're sniffing around." He paced the confines of the small room, agitated hands raking through his hair. "First light, we're gone. Get some sleep. Long day tomorrow." He exited, the lock tumbling shut with grim finality. Alara curled into herself on the thin mattress, her body racked with silent, shuddering sobs. Her single lifeline had frayed and snapped. An unknown future stretched before her, tethered to this volatile stranger. Adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. Against all instinct, sleep claimed her, dragging her into fractured dreams of shadowed forests and wild eyes perpetually gaining ground. Birdsong pierced the quiet, pulling her from sleep. For a fleeting, blissful second, she forgot, stretching languidly in the soft dawn light filtering through the window. Then memory slammed back, a physical blow, and she sat bolt upright with a gasp. Silas stood in the doorway. He'd changed. His clothes were cleaner, his demeanor unnervingly ordinary. Encountered on a sunlit street, He might pass for just another vacationer. "Time to move," he stated flatly, tossing a worn backpack onto the bed. He held out a bundle of clothing, denim, a plain shirt, a thin jacket. "Put these on." Alara looked pointedly at her still-bound wrists, then back at his impassive face. "How?" He sighed, a sound of weary impatience, and produced a knife. Her breath hitched, but he merely sliced through the duct tape, freeing her hands. "No funny business," he warned, his voice level. "I'll be right outside. 5 minutes." The instant the door clicked shut, Alara galvanized. She changed with frantic speed, her mind racing, calculating. This was it, her chance. The window still slightly ajar from the night. Could she fit? One leg was already through the opening when the door flew inward. Silas's face twisted into a mask of fury as he lunged. She shoved off violently, tumbling gracelessly out onto the dew-damp ground below, the impact jarring her bones. Scrabbling upright, ignoring the sting in her palms and the ache in her knees, she ran, instinct propelling her towards the shimmering expanse of the lake. Behind her, the crashing sounds of his pursuit through the undergrowth spurred her onward. "Don't look back." The weathered planks of the dock appeared ahead. She sprinted onto it. A small motorboat bobbed gently at the far end. Salvation. Her fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, fumbled with the thick mooring rope. It finally came free. She scrambled into the boat, nearly pitching into the cold water. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life just as Silas pounded onto the end of the dock. Their eyes locked for a charged second. She saw his rage, but beneath it, a flicker of something else. Fear. His sanctuary was breached. Alara slammed the throttle forward. The boat surged, cutting a sharp V across the lake's glassy stillness. She didn't ease off until the cabin was a mere insignificant speck against the tree line. As the raw surge of adrenaline subsided, tremors began, shaking her uncontrollably. Tears flowed freely now. Relief, residual terror, disbelief. She steered towards the opposite shore, where houses and docks signaled civilization. Nearing the bank, she saw figures pointing, a man already jogging down to the water's edge to meet her. Her legs threatened to buckle as she stepped onto solid ground. Strong hands offered support, concerned voices washing over her. Through the blur of tears, she managed the essential words. "Call the police, please." Later, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, watching the distant flashing lights converge on the cabin across the water, Alara reflected on the terrifying speed with which sanctuary had become sepulcher. The lake house meant to heal had nearly entombed her. The path forward felt daunting. Official statements, the lingering shadow of trauma demanding attention. Yet, gazing out at the lake, now serene under the morning sun, a profound gratitude washed over her. She had stared into the abyss and clawed her way back. Whatever lay ahead, she possessed a newfound certainty of her own resilience. The escape she sought from the world had instead delivered its harshest lesson. Darkness resides not in places, but within hearts. And against that darkness, the only recourse is to fight fiercely for survival. Alara tilted her lens skyward, chasing the moonlight's spectral dance across the cathedral's ancient face. Almost, she murmured, framing the shot. Naples breathed around us, a nocturnal symphony of distant Vespas, clinking glasses and the pervasive perfume of oregano mingling with sun-baked stone. Our gelato mission, conceived hours ago, felt like a distant dream. After 3 days navigating Italy's beautiful indifference to schedules, we'd surrendered to the city's languid rhythm. It was then the dissonance registered, a flicker in my peripheral vision, resolving into 2 figures, an old man, immaculate in a pale linen suit that seemed to absorb the piazza's glow, and trailing him, a boy shrouded in teenage stillness. They'd materialized at the edge of every frame tonight, beside the Fontana del Gigante, lurking near the trattoria, where terracotta pots spilled geraniums onto the cobblestones. A tourist hotspot breeds coincidences, I'd reasoned earlier, but their persistence felt less like chance, more like choreography. Ilara, I breathed, a feather-light touch on her arm. Don't turn suddenly. Remember those 2 from the fountain. They're here. Her camera lowered with practiced casualness, fingers feigning adjustments while her gaze swept sideways. The old man offered a broad, unnervingly familiar wave and began closing the distance between us. A magnificent evening for pictures, no? His English was thick, melodic, yet strangely flat, as he stopped invasively close. Behind him, the boy remained a cipher, gaze fixed on the worn paving stones. You are American girls? So very tall, such confidence. The smile he wore was a mask, ill-fitting around the eyes. Ilara instinctively edged nearer to me, her camera a shield against her chest. We really should be getting back, she offered, stepping backward. Our group will be waiting. The lie felt flimsy, transparent, but safer than admitting our independence. His smile stretched, humorless. But there is no tour group tonight, I think. I have observed you this evening, just 2 young ladies. He gestured vaguely towards the silent youth. My nephew, Alessio. He is studying your language, hoping for practice. Shall we take a coffee together? I know a perfect spot, very quiet. Alarm bells, cold and insistent, clamored in my skull. The nephew, Alessio, hadn't twitched, hadn't lifted his eyes, radiating zero interest in linguistic exchange. His quietude felt unnaturally heavy, a deliberate erasure of self. No, thank you, Ilara stated, her voice firm. We pivoted to leave, but the man sidestepped, blocking our path, that vacant smile unwavering. His hand shot out, surprisingly strong, clamping onto Ilara's arm just above her elbow. Ice flooded my veins, my heart slamming against my ribs. Do not be impolite, he chided, his tone hardening abruptly. I only wish to assist the boy's learning. Perhaps Italian. You have the look, yes? Excellent practice. Neither Ilara nor I, both fair-haired and unmistakably foreign, bore any resemblance to locals. Alessio shifted, a ripple of discomfort, but stayed mute. Ilara tugged against the man's grip. Let go! Her voice rose sharper now. A few heads turned among the passers-by, gazes curious but detached. No one intervened. The man began speaking rapidly in Italian, a low, insistent burble, attempting to steer Ilara towards the shadowed maw of an adjacent alley. Instinct honed by forgotten self-defense classes surged through me. Polizia! the word ripped from my throat, raw and desperate, echoing off the ancient cathedral walls. Aiuto, help! The grip vanished. The man recoiled, hands raised in a pantomime of innocence. Alessio finally looked up, his face a canvas of conflicting fear and nascent relief. Lights flickered on in windows above. An elderly signora leaned out from a balcony, peering down. From a nearby restaurant, two waiters emerged, aprons stark white against the night, moving towards us with undeniable purpose. The man's facade dissolved. Merely being friendly, he stammered, backing away hastily. No cause for such theatrics. He seized Alessio's arm, melting back into the labyrinthine side streets as quickly as they had appeared, leaving us trembling under the cathedral's impassive gaze. The waiters reached us, a barrage of concerned Italian peppered with broken English. Understanding dawned, and they ushered us into the warm, fragrant haven of their restaurant. Water appeared. The owner, Isabella, spoke soothingly, while someone called the Carabinieri. The police arrived swiftly, their manner professional, almost routine. They listened, took descriptions, showed us laminated photos of known individuals who preyed on tourists. Isabella summoned her daughter, Sophia, whose fluent English bridged the gap, ensuring our statements were clear. That night carved a fissure in our journey, but light poured through the crack. Isabella, radiating maternal authority, refused to let us walk back to our hotel alone, insisting we wait while she closed up. Sophia, a tourism student at the university, began to talk, not just translating police procedure, but illuminating a different Naples, one actively working towards visitor safety. She told us about the Zone Secure, a network of businesses pledged to assist tourists in distress. Isabella's trattoria bore the small blue sticker in its window, a beacon we hadn't noticed before. Sophia showed us the app mapping these sanctuaries across the city. The following day, propelled by a newfound resolve, we joined a free walking tour led by university students like Sophia. They armed us with knowledge, streets to avoid after dusk, common scams to recognize, emergency contacts. But they also unveiled the city's fierce beauty, its hidden courtyards, its unscripted generosity. Through Sophia, we connected with a vibrant online community of female travelers sharing real-time safety updates and encouragement, forming impromptu alliances for evening explorations. Alara's photograph of the moonlit cathedral, ironically, found its way into a new tourist safety brochure, illustrating the very program that had indirectly sheltered us. The image held both the ethereal beauty of Naples and the quiet vigilance required to truly appreciate it. We extended our stay by 3 days, navigating the city with altered awareness. We knew which doorways offered refuge, which shops glowed late into the night, which routes felt secure. Isabella's became our nightly ritual, a place to swap stories with fellow travelers under the watchful eyes of our impromptu guardians. The encounter reshaped our approach to travel, layering caution onto our curiosity without extinguishing the flame of adventure. It taught us that awareness and openness could coexist. Crucially, it revealed that for every shadow seeking to exploit vulnerability, countless hands are ready to offer genuine aid. Just last week, a message arrived from a young woman traveling solo, finding herself in a similar unnerving situation near the same piazza. She'd recalled the blue sticker from our shared posts, knew Isabella's door was open, and found shelter there until help arrived. Now, when asked about Naples, I speak of Isabella's sharp, sweet limoncello and Sophia's passionate historical insights. I describe the Signora on the balcony, a silent sentinel until she saw we were safe, and the waiters who moved without hesitation towards strangers in need. Because that is the enduring narrative of that night, not the fear, but the fierce protective embrace of community. Signore Bellini, in his unsettling linen suit, inadvertently taught us the most valuable lesson. True hospitality never demands, it simply offers. Real kindness fosters safety, never fear.